Welcome to the A&A Podcast, where we discuss topics of interest to our audience. We are your hosts. I am Alexander,
And I am Antonio.
and today is the last episode of this season.
Yes.
And we have a special guest for this last episode. Can you tell us our guest, Antonio?
Yes. He has a doctorate in clinical psychology. He has a master's in counseling psychology. He's a licensed marriage, family, and child therapist in the state of California. Has a master's of divinity from the Franciscan School of Theology from Berkeley, California, and a bachelor's in philosophy from St. Mary's College in Moraga, California.
Yes.
And he's also a professor at Oblate School of Theology.
Welcome, Father Brian Silva.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here with you too. And I'm privileged to be the last one.
Yes. And Alexander, we have also another interesting topic again. What are we talking about today?
Yes, we are going to talk about Catholic doctrine in human dignity, marriage, and sexuality. So I think we can start this our last topic putting base on the main concept that is human dignity, that we will use different documents of the church and different authors. So I think the principal concept that we have about human dignity is from Dignitas Infinita, that state that human dignity is an indispensable starting point for understanding the human person.
Yes. And also, what we hear about the concept of dignity is that every person has dignity or an infinite dignity that is inalienable and grounded in their very being. And so, one of the things that we talk a lot about in philosophy classes and theological classes like monotheology is that everybody has dignity just by virtue of being human. So, everybody's holding the same on the same level. But do you think, Father Brian, that everyone has the same sense of having dignity, or that we can make an argument that the way society operates these days, this is not really reflected?
I think probably everyone does have that sense of dignity. I think that one of the qualifying factors or characteristics would be the way that the documents talk about it as this fourfold distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And that distinction really separates out the elements of what that dignity would look like.
Yeah.
So there are elements of it where we would say there are people who have more dignity than others if they're wealthier, they're living in better circumstance, etc. But that's only one of the four elements. So how you measure that, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we say human dignity, what do we mean? The document doesn't define it in a scientific way to say exactly what are we talking about. It just kind of says, as other documents do, bishops and Vatican documents, they just kind of state a word without saying this is what we mean by that. So that limits, I think, the usability of the document.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think we can have these two different groups when we are thinking about dignity. The people that they are lacking dignity because they are living in very poor conditions, just not economic conditions, but in different fields. And on the other hand, the people that think that have a lot of dignity and they can use it like oppression to others. So how do you see in the society these two, like a dichotomy, about these two groups in terms of dignity?
Yeah, I think, the fact that the church defines it the way they do is helpful from the perspective of understanding the different ways in which we would use the word human dignity, right? So ontologically, that's one of the areas. Ontologically, you have this dignity, right? So then the argument is that ontological piece kind of the same across the way we see people? So what do we do with a teaching like homosexuality being ontically evil? And that's a Vatican document. So what do we do with that when we say there is an ontological dignity across the board? Well, maybe except in this, it's these difficulties or challenges in the wording that I think reduce the ability of people to fully understand what the church, capital T, capital C, is
Yeah.
trying to say, because it's not consistent across documents. But I think by putting those four out there, it's easier for us to converse about or talk about the way dignity is expressed. Is it ontological? Is it moral? Is it social? Is it more of an existential dignity?
We were talking about, the way the church defines um, this human dignity
Mhm.
all across the board. But also, there's a sector of the world that doesn't believe in God, or it's not part of the church,
Right.
right? And so, especially because a big part of what we say, um, that we derive this human dignity, is that we are made in the image of God,
hmm
and because of that, then we all have the same dignity.
Yes.
How can we make the same argument to an atheist, for example, who does not believe in God and doesn't believe that there's a God, and then to make an argument and say there's an equal value to everybody?
Right. Philosophically, that's a great question, because that person, by definition, wouldn't necessarily believe in God, and therefore wouldn't agree with the creation account in the Old Testament. And so that argument would limp right
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning. I think the only way that we could do that would be not an appeal to a scriptural story, but more an appeal to um, human experience in the world. We all should be respected as human beings, and then we can argue, I think, that that's true in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Is it different to kill an animal than it is to kill a human being, and why? What's that differential about? And so I think instead of arguing to a biblical scriptural story, you'd have to argue to a logical, whether modern formal logic or classical logic, you'd have to argue to a logical end instead of a scriptural end.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when you mentioned this ontological perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and then when we move to the moral dignity, do you think that the people can use this moral dignity, especially based on the concept that the individual can exercise their freedom and conscience to say, okay, I am free to decide whatever I want to do? Do you think that, and what are the boundaries that we
Mm-hmm.
can consider in order to define more exactly this concept?
Yeah, well, I think the document you shared with me talks about that some of these principles are not just you can do whatever you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you were talking about, Antonio, is that not everyone is going to buy into the Roman Catholic religious scriptural system.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we then do that? And I think that's one complicating factor. Another complicating factor might be that some of the documents of the church are not really written in a way that they're accessible to the normal man on the street layperson um, in the way they're written. And so that may be a shortcoming.
Hmm.
But I think using the principle that everyone is born with a certain demand for respect because of their humanity, whether scripturally based or whether logically based or experientially based. I think many times um, agnostics or atheists would still acknowledge that being human beings are blessed in some special way with a demand for respect,
Mm-hmm.
simply because of being human, whether they're poor, living in a third world country, or living in a first world,
Yeah.
setting.
But I think we can, when we look at history, and I'll make the example of colonization,
Mm-hmm.
where there were a lot of countries that were colonizing poorer countries, and there was always this distinction of you cannot marry or you cannot have intercourse with some of these people that or these countries that we are colonizing,
Mm-hmm.
because there was seen sort of like a difference in the degree of the humanity. But then you see places like in Mexico, Central and South America,
Sure.
where the Spaniards or the people from Portugal came, and there really wasn't this this differentiation. I
Right.
guess there was a little bit of that, of like, we are a superior race, and so we're coming and we're
Right.
taking over. But in terms of the intermarriage,
Right.
and there's the term of mestizaje, of
Mhm.
the mixture of races, it
Right.
wasn't really like an issue.
No, and I mean, that's kind of human nature,
Yeah.
right? You have Jesuits and Dominicans, right?
Yeah.
Spaniards and Portuguese who colonize. The mandate is not to have sex with the native peoples, the first world people, yet they do.
Mm-hmm.
So do we see that in a positive light? Do we see it in a negative light? Do we say it shouldn't have been like that, but it was? How do we frame that? And I think to some extent it's a wonderful argument that doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Right. It's a historical piece where you go, human failing, and they did have sex, and therefore there are a mix.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that? Well, they're human beings,
Yeah.
and they demand a certain respect because of their ontological qualities. And when I was going through theology at Berkeley, one of the big concepts that was coming up was the discussion of how we do mission,
Mm-hmm.
because in the past we had colonized people, taken over native peoples, made them Christian by force.
Mm-hmm.
If they didn't want to be Christian, kill them. If they wanted to be Christian, make them work in the fields. I mean, it was a weird kind of, we love you, but don't come near us. Just go over there and work. So there was this odd piece to it, I think. And a lot of that was sanctioned to some degree or another by Roman documents, Roman statements, even Roman example. The example of popes, the examples of cardinals and archbishops and bishops being kind of special royalty in a sense.
Mm-hmm. I think the example that you just mentioned are very related with the other two types of dignity based on the social perspective and the existential one, because any person needs the quality to live in good conditions. Even in terms of missions, you cannot just go and try to impose everything,
right?
Not respecting their believers, the way how they live, and different things. And at the same time, we have to live in peace, joy, and hope. That is part of the most basic roots, I would say, about Christianity. But in different times of Christianity, we saw that we didn't do a very dignity,
a very good job of it.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think that's, in some ways, that's the bottom line. Is some of the things that are here on the document you shared with me, I looked at and I thought to myself, gee, it's nice to say that, but we haven't lived it out.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's nice for so and so to say that, but he didn't live it out. You know what I mean? There's a reality to it that I think speaks to the human condition. Not necessarily the dignity, but the condition of being human and being frail, doing things that serve my needs versus the needs of everyone. And I think you're right, Alex, that there is this statement about living in, I forget where it is, but living in hope and
hope, peace, and joy.
There it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, peace, joy, and hope. That's nice to say.
And this is what we just were talking in the last class, that in many documents of the church or in the laws of the church, everything shapes perfect. But then when you move to the reality, when you see the original cases, it's completely different.
Yeah.
And I think that the best example are the papal teachings, that you have three different approaches, I would say, about dignity between St. John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and then Francis.
Right.
That why dignity cannot be just one thing.
Well, because they're coming from different perspectives. I mean, J2P2 is talking about a kind of staid position.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the church has taught for a long time. And then you have to include, too, at what point in John Paul II's life as Pope did he say this? Because in the beginning, he would have been more cognitively able and toward the end of his papacy, he would have been less cognitively able.
Yes.
Without saying demented. Benedict is coming from a whole different perspective. He's not pastoral. This is a guy who's a university professor steeped in philosophy and church logic, church teaching. Now, he did some good pastoral things as Pope, but it's not where he's coming from. That's not his background, right? And Francis, just the opposite. Francis is, the Pope who comes in following Benedict and basically says, the carnival is over, right? Don't give me the lace. I don't want the fur. Put the slippers back in the museum. He's the guy who says we're in the modern age, which is different than, I think, Benedict. Benedict is not, his way of leading the papacy was not necessarily people on the streets today. It was a very mental, kind of educational, theological world that he lived in. Francis was not that. I think Francis came in with a much more pastoral beginning of the papacy, saying, no, it's about where we're at today. Where we were back then, whatever, pick a year, less important, less of a priority than where we are today and what's kind of challenging people today in reality. Now, I don't know where Leo is going to take us because he's kind of a mix. Leo's still a little bit conservative in that sense of where Benedict was, but he's also present to the present day. So we'll have to see what he does, whether he, comes up with some new idea, and hopefully defines his terms well, because that's not something I see a lot in church documents, is the ability to speak clearly in that sense.
I think when you were talking about the last four popes, especially the big differences among all three of them, but especially Pope Francis and Pope Benedict, I think one of the things that Pope Francis wrote a lot and said a lot, and he was really, his focus was very pastoral, and he was really focused on the reality of where the world is today. And not just so much, I think there was an element of this is what the church teaches, but also this is where we're at. And if you remember the encyclical, I think it was Amoris Laetitia, I believe, where a lot of people were very scandalized because they thought he was reframing a lot of doctrine and whatever, especially like in the institution of marriage. Right. And but it is interesting the way that marriage is seen now in the world, for example, and the way that it's been seen. Like, for example, the church defines it, like as an institution of the Creator to realize in mankind His design of love, it's conjugal love, and so. But it wasn't always this way. For many centuries, marriage was transactional, and it was to establish certain things precisely. And now we are in a time where we talk about it being love, but then only under certain terms.
Well, that's the nature of the way the church has operated. The church has operated in a way over time, when you look at historical and even, moral teaching, they've operated in a way to say, this is how the church operates, and this is the criteria under which we measure that. And very often that criteria it's old. It may not be informed by modern research. There's a lot of spaces where one could say the challenge is really the church has become so bunkered in a wall philosophically that it doesn't see what's happening in the world. It tries to comment on it, but when you read it, you say, gee, that's nice, but how does it land on both feet on terra firma, and that's kind of where I sit most of the time. Is they make wonderful statements. Great. Now, what does it mean? How would you define your terms? How does it really relate to people on earth? Because it's 20,000 feet off the ground most of the time.
I think when we talk about marriage, one of the authors talk about the unitive and the procreative meaning. That I think not talk about homosexual couples, but even in the regular union, we see that if the person is cannot be pregnant, is this meaning of procreative lacking? There is a space to talk. Okay, now marriage is not based in a man and woman,
Mm-hmm.
and it's open to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Because some concepts I see that are very in the I would use perfect model, but in the regular model that we
Sure.
have in different cultures, but even in the regular model, we can see this uh, emptiness in this
Right.
meaning.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think the difficulty in looking at church documents or church teaching is at times, maybe often, that the definition that they come up with, then there are exceptions to, which we kind of have to figure out how to talk around them because they're doctrinal in a way that, well, you have to believe this. Well, if I do, then you have to come up with a good way to explain the exception, right?
Mm-hmm.
If two people marry and one of them can't produce viable sperm or the other one can't produce viable ovum, that's God's fault, right? Joe didn't choose it and neither did Mary. So somehow we need to be able to explain that there are physiological and anatomical reasons why people who marry will not be able to fulfill this particular thing that we have somehow decided is really important. I'm not sure how important it is. I think there are other elements that would be more that I would prioritize more in marriage. Um, and yet, in some ways, when you look at the breadth of church teaching, it's very often talking about sex because we say the body is good according to who was it, J2P2, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the theology of the body. But when we talk about the body, oh my God, it's dirty. Well, which one is it? You know, so there's something odd in the way this plays out for real. Um, and that's, as I say, that's often where I'm at. I'm looking at it and saying, does it match what they're saying here with what they're saying over there, with what's happening in the world in a real way, in a contemporary, modern way?
Yeah, we've been talking about this related to a lot of things that we learn in theology school,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you see the reality of it,
Yeah.
and I think that a lot of times there's a huge gap between the documents that come out and the things that are said and the things that are taught
Yeah.
versus the reality that a regular person is living.
Sure.
And so I don't know how we could close that gap because it's really big and
Right.
it's almost like I don't know who you're writing this for.
Right.
Because when I come, I mean, even it's something as simple as the OCIA,
Yeah.
and I find the struggle of this is everything that we're learning and this is everything that is expected.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you go to a parish that is doing the OCIA, any parish, whichever one you pick, you don't see it applied
Right.
how the book tells you to apply it or the
Sure.
documents tell you to apply it.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a part of it, I think, Antonio. The other part of it is that to some degree, which is unfortunate,
Yeah.
to some degree, students believe that the catechism is a summa,
Mm-hmm.
and it isn't. You know, it's not even written well, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it to clearly state, you know, broader, more important concepts. So it's written as a document to be used by people entering the church to understand the basics of Roman Catholicism and church teaching. But we really need to be able to do a better job of saying, and there are going to be difficult challenges, and there are going to be times where people marry who are not going to be able to have kids, but that does not discount their commitment or their marriage, because it's a part of marriage, not a definer. And that's where I see the documents going, is this is a definer of good, holy marriage. Well, then God has a problem because God made Joe without the ability to make viable sperm.
Yeah.
And that's not on Joe.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to somehow explain that too, in addition. Right?
Yeah.
I remember a side, I think it was 2 years ago when I was reading this book of Newman, that he said, how can we talk about a God's father to the people when they don't have a father? many dysfunctional families
Sure.
there are in our parishes. And I was
Mhm.
thinking when I was reading about the principle of responsible parenthood,
Right.
how can I approach this topic in many classes? Or just if one child approached me and asked me, okay, who was my father?
Yeah. It's not just people who don't have fathers, it's people who have poor examples of fathers. So, from the psychological side, a child who's been abused, that concept of father is not going to be the Old Testament concept of
Yes,
the loving,
absolutely.
bearded man on a throne reaching out to his son in the Sistine Chapel. That's just not what they're going to see. So, how do we use the symbolism we want to use in a more accessible way for people, and understand that that's just a reality, you know? I mean, one of the things, and this isn't at all having to do with parenting, but I think it's one of the examples. What do we mean by falls like dew fall in the Eucharistic prayer?
Mm-hmm.
That's not an image people use day in and day out. It's a wonderful artistic image. That's nice, but does it speak to people in a kind of present fashion? Probably not. You know.
Yeah.
So there's elements of this where we would, I think, where we would want to say, what the church is teaching is valuable. There are also challenges or critiques that are valuable that help us to more fully nuance how this applies to life.
Yeah. I think another thing that the readings that we looked at, and talking about the unitive aspect of
Mhm.
marriage and the validity of it, it talks that it's not just the procreative part of
Right.
it, even though it emphasizes that a lot.
Yeah.
But it also talks about the total love and the giving of the one person to another,
Mhm.
right? And so, and how the sexual act really acts as a way of giving oneself to another person. But I wonder if this is, I wonder how we separate that and saying, well, two people who love each other are giving themselves to one another
Mhm.
in love, in a sexual act, and then, but it's only a true giving of themselves if they're married. I mean, that's my understanding of
Right.
it. But can we really make that kind of a assumption? Do you think
Philosophically, yeah.
philosophically?
Faith-wise, probably not.
Okay.
But I mean, if you look at the language of that, the procreative life-giving
Mm-hmm.
aspect, it talks about the man's readiness to bear or have a child with a woman,
Mm-hmm.
while it talks about the woman giving a child to a man. So he's somehow privileged in that. That's the language.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Why don't we give that same privilege to the woman in the language? We don't. So there's something in there and that's what I'm trying to point out is it may be a good way to describe it, but what it's saying about your mindset is the the woman is somehow gifting the man, and the man is receiving, having a partnership with the woman.
Mm-hmm.
He's having a child with a woman. She's giving a child to the man.
Mm-hmm.
What's that about? Right?
Yeah.
Why is it not the same language if we're egalitarian, if we look at men and women equal, which of course the church doesn't. We know they don't, because as a woman you can't do things that men can do, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So but what is that then? What's that procreative piece?
Yeah.
It's participative, but it's not. How are you going to put that? Yeah.
And what about couples that cannot procreate
Yeah.
as well?
Right. And I don't know what you say.
Yeah.
If it was the choice of a guy to get um, um, even an accident, if it was a choice of the man to do something that would preclude his being able to have children, then I would think of it differently.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that some men biologically, anatomically, or physiologically can't have children, throw up your hands in the air and say, God, what?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we include those difficulties in our theology? if it's to be authoritative, then our leaders need to be able to address those challenges too.
Mm.
You know,
especially with the new realities where homosexual couples they affirm that they sometimes they live in better ways than the regular couple of marriage.
well,
They are
yeah,
more
sometimes, well, partially, I think that's because they might need to overcome something, right? In order to live in that union, they're having to overcome some of the social restrictions or overcome prejudice or whatever. And so I think that's a part of it too.
yes. So I think, Father, we discussed a lot of things about uh, marriage, about the dignity of the human people, and I'm sure the church teaching so far gave us a very, very useful laws and instructions, and even with the last popes are giving more pastoral openness, I will say, in order
We would hope.
to consider everybody, because like the main statement, we born with this dignity in us because we were created in the image of God. So I hope that this topic could be developed more in the future. And thank you so much for your time with us, with your knowledge and your wisdom. And I think we can conclude our episode,
And our
Antonio.
season. But before we go, we always finish our podcast with a question for our followers, or food for thought. And is there anything that you would like to invite whoever is
Oh,
listening to this? A question,
yeah.
a thought.
No, I think the conversation we've had is provocative enough. I mean,
Mhm.
there's plenty of questions
Yes.
and there's plenty of challenges to be asked about in looking at this type of document.
Yeah.
To say, well, what do you mean by that?
Good.
Define your terms.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Alexander. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you on the next episode on the next
The
season
next season. That's
of the
right.
A&A podcast. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.